So we just bid farewell to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, but we have reported on over the past year or so some resignations from Blinken's State Department. And three of these people went on 60 Minutes. And this past Sunday, they were featured in a segment about the State Department's indifference and complicity in the Gaza genocide. So this is a write-up on the 60 Minutes piece by Common Dreams. In a Sunday interview with 60 Minutes, former State Department officials spoke with journalist Cecilia Vega and offered a window into how the United States has greased the wheels of carnage in Gaza. Hala Rarit, an American diplomat who spent 18 years working on human rights and counterterrorism in the Middle East and elsewhere, left her post last spring, becoming the first State Department diplomat to publicly resign over the Biden administration's policies backing Israel's siege on Gaza, according to Democracy Now! Rarit would send daily reports to senior leadership in Washington containing, quote, gruesome images and her warnings, according to 60 Minutes. I would show the complicity that was indisputable. Fragments of U.S. bombs next to massacres of mostly children, Rarit recounted. Here's what else Rarit had to say. Now, 60 Minutes, last time we featured their stuff, they did copyright claim it, so we're doing the whole audio thing here. So this is the audio version of what she had to say, in part, on that interview.
Show the complicity that was indisputable. Fragments of U.S. bombs next to massacres of mostly children, and that's the devastation. It's been overwhelmingly children.
When you tried to speak out, vocalize what
Yes.
you saw happening in Gaza, you
Yes.
feel like you were told to shut up.
Yes. I would show images of children that were starved to death. In one incident, I was basically berated, don't put that image in there. We don't want to see it. We don't want to see that the children are starving to death.
Who told you that?
A colleague.
A superior?
Yeah. I was told the contrary by others. Keep them in. We need to see it.
Goes on. There's a linkage between every single bomb that is dropped in Gaza and the U.S. because every single bomb that is dropped from an American-made plane. Josh Paul, a former director in the State Department's Bureau of Political and Military Affairs, who resigned shortly after October 7th, told 60 Minutes. So we covered this. This was within a few weeks of October 7th. He was one of the first to go. And Josh Paul was featured in this piece. So here is a second quote from him.
After October 7th, there was no space for debate or discussion. I was part of email chains where there were very clear directions saying, here are the latest requests from Israel. These need to be approved by 3 p.m.
Expedited.
Correct.
Where were these orders to greenlight weapons transfers coming from? How high up did this go?
This came from the president, from the secretary, and from those around them.
Now think about that. Not even a 24-hour turnaround. You would get emails in the morning saying, this came from Israel. We need approval on this by 3 p.m. 3 p.m. And this was in the immediate aftermath of October 7th. So you see how all in we were on one strategy from day one, according to Josh Paul. A third person interviewed, Andrew Miller, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Israeli-Palestinian Affairs, resigned last June to, quote, spend more time with his family, but has since gone public with concerns about the U.S.'s role in the war. So he didn't have the courage to resign in protest at the time, but now he's making his concerns known. The highest-ranking official to do so thus far, according to 60 Minutes. So here's what Andrew Miller had to say.
The Israelis were using those bombs in some instances to target one or two individuals in densely packed areas. And in enough instances, we saw that was in question how Israel was using it, and those weapons were suspended.
The U.S. suspended a shipment of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel in spring 2024, though in general, weapons have continued to flow. Reacting to Miller's comments, that Israel bombed densely packed areas, one observer wrote Sunday, 60 Minutes is finally exposing the supply chain of genocide. Yes, finally exposing the supply chain of genocide. You're finally starting to see some of the media come out after the election is over, as Trump is about to take office, and say what they should have been saying all along. One more example of this, Chris Hayes. So Case Study QB with the video clip. Thanks as always. Great work, my friend. Chris Hayes reflects on Biden's Gaza genocide legacy as he plans to send $8 billion more in weaponry to Israel as he leaves office. So this is a 7-minute piece. We were not going to play the whole thing, but here he talks about the Leahy Law, explains what that is, and who is incidentally exempt from it.
And as the Cold War finally wound down, there was one lawmaker who made an indelible contribution to rolling back these abuses and attempting to set a standard for American behavior abroad and the behavior of our allies that we armed. That was Senator Pat Leahy, Democrat of Vermont, in 1997. Leahy Law barred the Pentagon and the Department of State from transferring U.S. arms to countries that we thought were committing human rights abuses. And that is what I keep thinking of as I process the news that on the way out the door, the Biden administration is going to transfer $8 billion more in weapons to Israel, including fighter jets and attack helicopters, bombs, warheads, and artillery shells. $8 billion in weaponry given over to an ally waging what I think can only be described as total war in Gaza that has, according to, I think, multiple independent experts and reporters and NGOs, been committing war crimes, and ethnic cleansing, according to a former Israeli defense minister, where Israeli soldiers say they have been ordered to target and kill innocents arbitrarily, including children, and that they have used Palestinians as human shields for their operations in Gaza. As whistleblowers and detainees say the Israeli authorities regularly torture Palestinian prisoners. The UN says Israel is using starvation as a strategy in Gaza. Amnesty International says Israel is committing a genocide. Dozens of doctors, nurses, and paramedics who volunteered in Gaza and were there and saw up close told the New York Times they'd seen, as you see the images there in front of you, multiple children who were shot in the head or chest, bullets. And they even brought back the x-rays you're seeing right now to prove it, so people would believe that they had seen children with bullets lodged in their skulls. As Congresswoman Katie Porter pointed out in a House hearing last year, the U.S. ban on arms transfers to human rights abusers, the Leahy Law, has one big exception.
State Department says that aid should stop immediately if there's a problem. Does it?
It totally depends on the circumstances and situation.
Does it depend on the country that's getting the aid?
It also depends on the country receiving the aid. Yes.
So what country does aid not stop immediately under Leahy?
I'd have to go back and look through my notes.
You don't know what country that is? It's only one in the entire world. Guess what? Except for Israel.
Wow. What a segment. What a segment. Prompted by Biden's authorization of $8 billion more to Israel. Now, that was not the first weapon shipment to Israel. It wasn't the first aid package we sent to Israel, but it was the first one that got a segment like this with a week left before he's out of office. And this all becomes Donald Trump's problem. Yeah. You noticed the timeline. So did we. And so did our friend Nick Cruz at RBN. Chris Hayes from MSNBC and 60 Minutes are finally running scathing segments explaining how Biden enabled a genocide in Gaza. How sick is it that liberal culture waited until after the election, when Biden and Democrats stood no chance at winning, to expose this? How evil is Chris Hayes for endorsing and going to bat for genocide Joe Biden, despite knowing all of his crimes? He continues, one of the reasons I believe liberal media is covering this now is they are furious at Joe Biden. First, they were upset he didn't drop out earlier. Now Biden is saying if he stayed in, he would have won. This infuriated the liberal class. Now they are okay with destroying his legacy. I do think there is no love left for Joe Biden amongst these people. That's why I notice you're not seeing, as the final days of his presidency wind down, you're not seeing the puff pieces about a career in service. No, I think Nick is 100% right about
like
that.
Joe Biden's arms reaching out to America.
Yeah, right, exactly. None of that. No more of that. No, they have had it with this guy. He burned their bridge with them. But it's true, man. It's true. Now you see all of a sudden now CBS and MSNBC doing pieces like this. Now, look, I'd rather those stories exist than not. But these State Department officials resigned over the past year. They didn't all walk out the door last week. These stories have been out there. Notice these stories were not featured in mainstream outlets until now. We were covering this. We covered when Josh Paul quit. I don't remember the other two, but I know we did, by name at least, but I know we did a few other stories about State Department officials leaving. Like, this has been an ongoing story for the past year. This has been happening. And now with a week left, they sit these people down and look, the interviews are damning. They're damning. Josh Paul goes and says, we were given not even 24 hours to greenlight aid packages when Israel needed them. You have the first woman there talking about how basically her reports were censored, right? Basically, they didn't want to see the pictures of dead children or fragments of explosives next to children after a bomb was dropped. You even saw the third guy, Andrew Miller, talk about, yes, they used 2,000-pound bombs to kill one or two people who they wanted to, not giving a fuck who else was killed in the blast. That we saw that in November. That was too bad for even Wolf Blitzer to take. I forget who the guy was who he interrogated, but that was a strike that killed, I believe it was about 300 people in order to target one Hamas commander who Israel said they thought they got but never provided any evidence for. The point is these horrors were ongoing, and now you're seeing segments like this after it's too late to hold Joe Biden's feet to the fire or the Democrats' feet to the fire. Now, as the changing of the guards approaches, now they're finally able to tell the truth. Again, I'd rather have these segments out there than not, but it really just does show you where their priorities lie, because these were truths that were unfolding throughout the past year. They didn't just drop on Sunday.
I think Nick's on the right track there, but whenever you see the whole, and I don't think he would disagree with this, whenever you see the whole media all at once make a shift like this, I'm sorry. I believe that somebody makes a call. I really do. Like, I believe somebody says, okay, you can take the gloves off, because this happens too often. It happens too often where all of a sudden it happened with the World
World Central Kitchen,
the World Central Kitchen. All of a sudden, everybody noticed that Israel's committing a genocide, and then they all at once shut up about it again.
Yep.
It's just too coordinated to be completely organic. Yes, of course, you've got a certain timing thing that this administration is coming to an end. But this is a little too coordinated for me to believe that they didn't get some kind of permission to go ahead and go on the warpath like this. So you have to ask yourself, why? Well, I think there's a lot of, and you're seeing this with the Mark Zuckerberg on Rogan in a more trivial realm than this. Everyone sees the momentum shift. They all want to be on the side that's winning. They want to distance themselves from the things that they have supported and been associated with that are deeply unpopular. I think for the Democrats, they're looking to throw Biden under the bus because they're done as a political party. I know a lot of people are saying, well, look how it looked in 1980. Yeah, I'm sorry, this is different. This is different. In my entire life, I've never seen one of the two major parties be so completely discredited and so lacking in any basis for making an argument for its own revival. They are just completely destroyed. And I think in their desperation, they're saying, well, the first thing we have to do is distance ourselves from Joe Biden and put the blame on Joe Biden for all of these horrors of his administration and establish the Democratic Party as a separate thing that was
Was
misled.
his, basically. That was his.
It's his.
Like,
all
him,
of this belongs to Joe Biden.
Let him own all of that. Let him be the poster boy for all of that.
He probably won't live out the year anyway.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
And if he does, he's not going to know what's happening.
Exactly. Bury the party with Uncle Joe. I mean, that does seem to be, what they're doing now. And when you look at, this is why I said in the previous segment that, he's really going to go down in history. I mean, it really is starting to get to a point where you're starting to make that comparison to George W. Bush, because look at how quickly, especially if this ceasefire holds, and especially if Israel doesn't get anywhere close to really what they wanted out of this whole war. At that point, it is going to be the mainstream narrative that this was just one of the great crimes against humanity,
of course,
committed for absolutely
we've been
no
saying
reason.
that
Like there won't
throughout.
even, well, obviously we knew that, but there won't even be like a real politic angle, right? Like if this ends on terms that are not even favorable to Israel, then even the Atlantic Council is going to have a hard time justifying this to itself and to its list of future invitees. Right? Like, even if you are a bloodless, just New World Order ghoul who has no human concern for the Palestinians or the Ukrainians or the Russians or anybody, it's going to be impossible to view these past 4 years as anything but a bloodbath that was entirely in vain. They won't even be able to justify it to themselves. Remember when Madeleine Albright, they said, were the sanctions on Iraq worth killing 500,000 kids? And she said, yes.
Oh, I think they were, yeah.
Yeah. In her mind, she could say yes. In her mind, obviously, no sane and decent person would say yes, but she could justify that to herself. I don't think they're going to be able to even justify these past 4 years to themselves, given how all of this is unfolding. Given if, and big if, obviously, if this ceasefire unfolds the way it looks like it's on track to, if the Ukraine war ends on terms that it looks like it's on track to, how do you look back at this with anything but eternal shame? And how do you revive the reputations of people who had anything to do with it? Which is why I think you're right. They're going to try and just package this with Biden and just bury it and see if they can move on in some way.
Right. Which also means, and that was already a foregone conclusion, Kamala's illusions of a comeback.
Right.
Nobody associated with this administration has a future.
Exactly.
Please clap.